Volatility in commodities and the April USDA crop report with Jerry Gidel in his weekly commentary right here on Connected Farmer, your channel to keep you up to date with the latest trends in agriculture and livestock. Stay tuned and don't forget to subscribe. So, Jerry, how are you today? Let's start the conversation with you about this price volatility seen this Friday.
Well, we've had quite an interesting roller coaster week. We've had kind of that same situation over the last, 3 or 4 weeks, really, as the market tries to look at the information that's coming out of South America about different crop situations there and updates from the various governmental agencies down there. And of course, we had the big USDA update here for April last Thursday afternoon, or Thursday morning, I should say. And it turns out that, we've kind of bounced around ever since. And so that's really been an interesting twist on things. To some extent, that's not surprising as you go through a growing season. Everything's highly important and everybody's wanting to get a lot of things happening here in the U.S.
Yes, and how much of a factor was that report on that volatility?
Well, I think it was definitely, I'd have to say probably in many cases on corn and soybeans for sure. It wasn't as aggressive of numbers, and we kind of discussed a little this last week even. But at the same time, the markets, particularly with the high percentage of our investors, commodity funds, and they really are combining their investment or disinvestment a little bit on the technical features they see. And so, with the weakness on Friday last week, we followed that through pretty aggressively here, even on Monday, and that with soybeans really taking a tumble. All the markets did some, but then the one thing that I think that everybody continues to look at here is that the Chinese have been a significant buyer of corn. The activity hasn't been all that great in their recent purchases in that, but even if they move the amount of corn that they've already purchased is a significant factor. And it's actually getting reflected in what they call the basis, the difference between the futures and the cash prices here in the US. And that particular factor has kind of become a backbone sometimes in these markets where the price falls, nobody sells anything. The commercials out there really want to get a hold of some stuff here because they've got commitments to make shipments overseas, or they need it for processing here in the US. And so they tighten that relationship between cash and futures. I think even in my hometown out here, where I grew up in Western Iowa, is down to a nickel under for a corn basis out there. That's unheard of, actually. I can't remember the last time. Even I think in 2012, I'm not sure we were that tight. We might have been 15 or 20 or 15 or 10 cents under, but I don't remember a nickel and that. So that's, and in other places in the country, close to the rivers and close to processing in the East, you're over the futures price on the cash price versus futures. So that's really an interesting twist in this thing that hasn't, the futures market spins around in here at times, but that really is an indication that there's still a strong need to get remaining supplies out of people's hands in the farming community and into the world trade situation at this point. Interesting, this time of year, a lot of farmers and producers out there are not really interested in delivering corn when they want to go out to the field and plant their next crop. They are a real creature of habit. I grew up in that world, and I know that this time of year they want to get out there and get that new crop in and get it off to a good start and all this other stuff. And even the weather recently hasn't helped us a lot, because we had some nice weather here in the middle of March and even up through later in March. And then since, the last week or so, we've had some very cool temperatures, and they're talking about cool temperatures next week, which I think is probably going to keep a few more planters out of the field here for a little longer as they wait to see if they can get this cold temperatures behind before they put the seeds in the ground.
And what about the weather in the northern plains? I've heard about some dryness there.
Oh yes, the issues in North Dakota. There was some snows around earlier this week, but half an inch, or excuse me, 6 inches of snow. Boy, you might scratch out 2 or 3 tenths of moisture. In some other areas, there's also some that floating around, and then also it's also across the border there in Canada. So the spring wheat issues and that. In Canada and on the dry conditions here in North Dakota. That now we've had some rains bouncing around here, but interestingly enough, there's parts of Iowa that are still not in great shape on moisture at this point, and same situations in parts of Indiana and Ohio. There, so that's the thing that's kind of wild about. But at the same time, talk about what's happening down in your part of the world down there, Luis. Things have improved in Argentina, it seems like, but it's been shifting around up there in Brazil. Mato Grosso has definitely been limited on its moisture. Now, to some extent, well, that should impact the beans, but in many cases, the soybean harvest is pretty well wound down. And where the soybean activity harvesting is going on is in the southern areas of the country in Rio Grande do Sul. And so everybody's watching the second crop corn down there, safrinha corn. There is some shower activity for next week in parts of Mato Grosso, but some people don't have a lot of moisture in it. And then a lot of other people pointing out that the dryness that has been even in other parts of Brazil is going to continue, particularly Mato Grosso do Sul and Paraná. And so the second crop corn there is not so good. So, but our head just keeps spinning. Where do we look to find out where the weather influences? And it seems like that the market takes advantage of one time and then one the next on this at this point. And I think that was part of the reason I think that we saw the values on spot corn here, the May corn in the U.S. That's the magical $6 mark. I think we mentioned that was a possibility a couple of weeks ago that we might see something there. It took a while to get here, and then it didn't stay there very long. It popped up overnight, and then we had kind of disappointing exports this week. I'm not sure exactly. Sometimes overseas buyers want to see a report before they want to make a decision one way or the other, and that there's talk that there's going to be big shipments of corn next week. But I think we only had our exports yesterday were only 13 million on corn exports, and we actually had a drop in wheat and a very small 3.3 million shipment or export sales in soybeans. Now, soybeans, we're not going to have big numbers because I think our number right now is, even with this number here this week, we're just within 5 or 10 of the previous estimate, and they increased the number last week by 30 up to 2.28 billion. So, but the thing about it is, on a weekly basis here over the last 21 weeks, I think we got to have a number that's under one. And our sales have to be like 2.4 or 3 million a week. So there's still, we're not going to expect big numbers here. Even if we did, that number is still low out there. We're not going to have 15 and 20 million export sales. The world has switched most of their purchases to South America. Now, the big question is, some people, particularly in the corn side, are wondering if the Chinese will even take all their corn. And I think that's kind of a twist. That's one of the things that came up in this week's data users meeting that's been held here on Wednesday and Thursday.
Do you still see room for more highs in corn?
I think there is a chance. Technically, at this point, $6 is a number here that is going to have some, like all these things. The first time you touch a major number, you always have kind of a few people that want to take profits, and I don't think that's surprising at this point. I guess the slip it all the way back down to 282, 285, or 580. You can see where my mind's at. We're back, way back in the $3 and $4 stuff. But at this point, 582 is kind of the bottom side of the recent range. So I think we're kind of keeping an eye on that. There's, I think, a technical idea on the soybeans, or excuse me, on this spot May corn is probably looking at a number in the 620, 625 zone, something like that. But it all depends a little bit on South American weather. I think weather next week is going to be quite important. If that front comes through there and gives a pretty good rain across lots of Mato Grosso. Now, I know that there's some other issues in other areas down there, but right now the whole world's fixation is going to be on one area of Brazil, and that because that's the leading producer of second crop corn down there. And so even if it's dry in Paraná and Mato Grosso, nobody will pay attention. And it depends on how the rains. It'll be just the same. If it doesn't rain there, then it'll go. But I think that's where we're at right now on the corn. But on a longer term basis, we also need to try to keep a pretty firm price around here to see if we can expand the U.S. Acreage out here on corn and soybeans. And that's a commentary that's popped up this week after the stocks report, or excuse me, the acreage report here late March, and now this week's latest USDA numbers. They're saying, well, Jesus, that's going to give us the kind of expansion we really kind of need to make people feel comfortable about what kind of prospects we have. So I'm not sure that every time we look at something that's going to really define what's going to happen in front of us, there's always other reasons. When you're in a situation as tight as we are in old crop, on old crop corn and soybeans, just everybody's still very, very pins and needles, if you will, about our prospects for the 2021-22 year. And what happens in the final crops in South America and what happens here in the U.S. On our growing season, our planting and growing season as we go through.
Yes, one thing you mentioned last week was the USDA's data user meeting. What have you seen there?
Well, this is the second time they've had this style of meeting. In the past, they've always kind of met in a city in the U.S. and the analysts kind of showed up about 100 plus or so. And that this time around, the last two times, because of the pandemic, we've had virtual meetings. And so they had that virtual meeting on Wednesday and Thursday. Wednesday was kind of a day to get updates on various ideas in various departments. Then yesterday, we had a question and answer period from the people attending there on their computers, and people submitted questions. Of course, one of the big questions, I think we kind of even mentioned it earlier here, was the fact that the Chinese corn numbers didn't really have much of change. And to some extent, this issue came up earlier in the year when we're looking at the Chinese projections on their corn number at only 10 million metric tons. This time they're up to 24 million. And the Chinese have always been a little less up to date on some of their data. To some extent, I think it's important that, and one of the big features that's come along here, by the way, in China's livestock feeding is it looks like that they have decided that instead of feeding all corn, they're going to go ahead and feed some wheat. And that's a pretty common approach around the world if prices on wheat are less than corn, because of the fact that surprisingly, you don't think about this, but there's 10 to 12% of protein in wheat, and there's only 8% or so in corn. So you have a little higher protein value. The biggest problem about you can't feed complete 100% rations of wheat because of the fiber in the seed. So uh, simple stomachs don't really go along with that. The other areas that was kind of discussed was the U.S. corn stocks numbers. That has been a real moving target for both the USDA and the trade. Started last year with lower than expected stocks, and we had an unusual June 1 stocks number that was higher than expected. Then that got adjusted in September. It really comes back to the quality of last year's crop. It makes it difficult for all of us to get a handle on things like that when you have a low test weight, which is a seed that doesn't have the kind of normal heft. Because interestingly enough, you think, wow, all that moisture we had in 2019, that should make a big plump seed. But because of the fact that it didn't have the longest growing season, got planted late, then it had problems in getting it harvested on time and this type of thing, it turned into having in essence a lower quality seed, which ultimately had impacts on how many bushels we had. Interestingly enough, we've had another twist this year where we had a season where the August till harvest time situation across much of the Midwest was very dry, and the humidity was very dry, so it sucked the moisture down on the seed that was being harvested. So it's been a tussle for them, but they're working on it and that type of thing. And right now, there's ideas, and I threw out an idea that maybe they should not make a big change in their August number, because one of the things that's plagued them over the last 10 years, and really in the last few years, that they've had limited resources, and so they've have reduced down their in-field analysis of corn and soybeans in August. And so basically they were looking at satellite information and things like that, producers' ideas of what the crop looked like. And then surprisingly, we had our biggest windstorm ever that hit Iowa, the derecho. And so that made that August numbers really kind of poor. So right now, at least, they're going to have that same tightness and funding for this coming year. But that's one of those issues out there that everybody's wants to do more with less. And so far, sometimes you don't get the best quality of information that you like, but they are a particular agency that really does feel like it wants to try to get as much of information from the producer back to the producer, and that's hopefully that helps them to get more information from the U.S. agriculture, because interestingly enough, you can't get good information if you have not good information coming in. That's one of the old traits we all know in the world, that if things aren't so good coming in, it's not going to be so good going back out.
That's valuable information coming from Jerry Gidel. Thank you.
Take care. Have a good week. We'll talk next week and see what the weather's doing around the world.